Hi, my name's Tom,
And I'm Katie.
and we are the founders of Walk in the Light International, and we wanted to share our story with you, how it got started and where it's come. So, where do we even start? It's kind of like the thing to think about is there's so much to all of it that we see God was actually doing. But I would say we'd probably get started with the fact that neither of us grew up in the church. Neither of us ever really had a concept of Jesus or what he had done for us. You actually got saved at...
In junior high.
Mm-hmm. I met her, I just graduated, I was 19, you were 16, and she invited me to church. I said, well, I got nothing to lose, so she's cute. And so we went, and man, I had no idea. Probably within 2-3 weeks, I realized this is real. Like, this isn't something... I kind of perceived that church was a place that people went, and if you followed the rules of the church, you probably won't get in trouble. You probably won't get arrested. Some of the stuff that was happening in my life. And so I figured, well, I might as well, try this out. But I'd realized, wow, like, there's a God, and he's really alive, and oh my goodness, I can't go back to my old life. And so I quickly I started reading my Bible. I got baptized. I was just giving my whole life. It was less about, this cute girl who was inviting me and more about this God that I'd realized was really alive and had died for me. And so really quickly, all of a sudden, there began to be a sense that there was a calling, as the church would say, on my life and on our lives. And I was at this concert one night and just worshiping, and this lady walks up to me, and it's like really awkward. She's in the front, and she turns around where everyone's like facing one way, turns around. I see this quick motion, and she's looking at me. She comes up to me, and she says, God's called you to speak the gospel in the darkness. And I was like, thanks, what do you say to that? And I was like, okay. And I told Katie and told my pastor, like, I have no idea what this means and if it even means anything. And there was already this sense that I like there was a calling. I need to do something about it. You were already applying to Northwest University in Kirkland, Washington, and so I said, well, they have a pastoral degree there. I might as well try it out. I had a criminal background, all this stuff. I was like, they're not going to accept me. But if they do, cool. Sure enough, I get accepted, which is like just an act of God in itself. And so we're getting ready. I propose, we get married. And right before we ended up going off to Northwest, we had a marriage counselor who was like, oh, my mentor, she's going to be in town. You got to meet her. So we're like, okay, whatever, sounds good. And we go and meet this lady, and she's like, I don't have time to talk to you. She's got all this other stuff going on. So she's like, but I'll pray for you, like Christians say, oh, okay, let's pray. It's like a way of ending a conversation. So she goes to pray for us, and she had this moment where she was like, oh my goodness. She's like, man, God's called you guys. And we're like, okay, like another weird Christian moment. And she says, but God's called you to do ministry in other countries, and yet to plant churches here. I'm like, what in the world? So I walk away from that, and we're like, man, there's just multiple times that this had happened where it was kind of like, God, what are you trying to say to us? Like, what do you want? Is this about being a pastor? Is this about being missionaries? Like, we had no concept of what really God was calling us to. So we ended up getting to Northwest, and probably within a couple months or so, one day I meet this guy who's just got this swagger, and he just like owned the street and excellent, and he's clearly not from America. And I meet him. He ended up living right next to us, and I thought multiple times, man, I want to meet that guy. He's just so interesting. And so I ended up meeting him.
Everybody knew him.
Oh yeah, everyone. He just was so loud and just funny and full of life. And so I got an opportunity to meet him, and he was looking to buy a car. I'm like, well, I can help you do that. And so he had never even heard of Craigslist, so I was like, oh, well, I'll help you. And so, the more I talked to him, I was like, man, I've got to know this guy more. This can't be just like a one time I meet this guy. And so he ends up telling me a story, telling me he's from Burkina Faso. Yeah, we had dinner, and he shared his story with us and
showed us where he was from on a map.
He said he's from Burkina Faso, and I'm like, I've never heard of it. And he was like, yeah, most people haven't. And so he ends up kind of just saying, hey, man, if because we had shared our story, saying, yeah, even recently this lady, she was like, God's called you to do ministry in other countries, and he's like, come to my country. And I'm like, Yeah, totally, man. We should totally do that sometime. And I kind of thought about it as if, like, someone invites you to dinner and they live far away, and you're like, yeah, we should totally do that. And it's like, never going to happen. So
I had no desire to go to Africa ever in my life.
well, I never left Washington until I met her. I was probably 20 years old before I left Washington State. And so, I am a middle child of 11. You don't travel much with 11 kids. And so Africa is like, okay, that's past Idaho. I know that. So I don't think that's going to happen. So then we really kind of just brushed it off, and then you started talking to me.
Yeah, I was getting ready to graduate college with my BA in psychology. And I just thought, let's do a scene. After I graduate, I want to go away and go to Europe and like backpack or do something really fun. And Tom came up with this super spiritual idea that instead of going backpacking through Europe, we should go to Africa, which I really didn't buy into that fair trade. I could really see that was the same thing.
Use my graduation money to go to Africa.
But slowly he convinced me that would be more of what we should do. And so we agreed to take that trip that next June.
So we talked to Danielle and we're like, so okay, we're going to go to Africa with you. What would we do when we got there? And there's a really cool moment in his apartment, his little college dorm
100-degree apartment with the
heat
full blast.
He says, welcome to Africa every time we'd go into his apartment. And so anyways, he opens up his journal, and when we asked him that question, what can we do? And he's like, you wouldn't believe it, but the last thing he was writing before he left Africa, because part of his story was just like, he felt God calling him to the U.S., but he didn't know why, and he just didn't even think it was possible. And then a couple meets him and says, hey, you should come to study in Washington where we live. We'll help you. And he's like, oh, my goodness. So he writes down his journal, God, like just questions of, God, why do you have me going to the U.S.? I don't understand. And so he just kind of prayed, and he wrote down, one of the things he wrote down was a school in his village. And he thought maybe that's part of the reason God's calling me, just because that's been a burden on his heart his whole life. And so he ended up sharing that with us, and we go, well, let's do it. How much is that going to cost? And he was like, oh, probably like 10 grand. And I'm like, 10 grand? I'm like, I'm like, we could do that. Let's do it. And so it ended up being like, $50,000. But anyways, probably would have won if he would have said that. So anyways, we sure enough, we planned this trip, and in 12 months, we're gonna go with Danielle to Africa.
To Burkina Faso.
Well, something happened in November following that, a couple months later, where he had lost his dad, and then a couple days later, he ends up losing his grandma. And he's like, I have to go home. I'm the oldest son. It's my responsibility. I have to go and bury my dad and take care of my mom. And he's going to come back to school, but he's like, I have to go and set all this stuff up. And so he's like, you should come. And I'm like, yeah, with like 2 weeks' notice, I should just go to Africa. I'm like, I don't have any extra money.
We didn't have a passport yet.
Didn't have anything.
We had not been prepared.
No, we had another 8 months. And so then I was like, yeah, Danielle wants me to go to Africa. And Katie's like, you're not going to Africa.
Yeah, he actually had the nerve to say, maybe if we just have enough money for just me to go. I was like, so you're going to go on my graduation trip without me? I was like, no, if God wants us to go, he's going to provide enough money for both of us to go.
And sure enough, we ended up raising more than enough.
Yep.
And within a couple weeks. And so we're like, well, I guess we're going to Africa on our winter break. And so we ended up getting on a plane. No organization. I don't advise this. No organization. Daniel wasn't even on the plane with us. He went a week ahead of us. Mm-hmm. And so we show up there, and it was crazy. The airport was like, I felt like it was World War II, like movie, pallets where you walk through, and there's these,
we didn't have a visa as well. We got to the airport, and we had to apply for the visa when we got there.
Yeah, I was like, oh, you can get it when you get there. And it was like, oh, didn't think about the fact that they speak French and we don't. And so they're like talking to us and asking us and pointing, and we're like, yeah,
they ended up taking our passports and keeping them. And Tom and I kind of looked at each other, and we're like, we're never leaving.
We're never going home. They threw it in a box. It was crazy. It was like with a bunch of other ones. We're like, yeah, we're never going to see that again.
I kind of feel like I was told to never let your passport not be with you.
Yeah. And so we ended up going with Danielle to his village, and it was at night. Literally, I'm not joking, there was a guy like Daniel didn't know how to get there. It had been a couple years since he had been home. We're in like the bush of Africa. There's like goat trails.
The Burkinabes were calling it the real Burkina.
Yeah. The people from the capital were like, oh yeah, we're going to the real Burkina. He's like, this isn't the real Burkina. I'm like, oh my gosh. So we get in a truck that someone loaned us, and literally we got to a point where Danielle didn't know where to go anymore, and we'd drive up to this like hut. A guy would come out, pitch black dark, and point, and then they would have this conversation. And then he started like leading us through the bush by running, like just running in front of the car. And we're just like, oh my gosh, what in the world is happening right now? There's kids chasing the vehicle. And that happened several times where someone else would take over running, and a couple hours later, just like 2 miles an hour going through this bush, we ended up what apparently was Danielle's mom's house, which was a mud hut. And so we get out, and there's this weird moment of like kids are taking our bags. I feel like it's the movie Coming to America when all their bags are put there and everyone takes them, and I'm like, what in the world, did we just lose all our stuff? Danielle's like, it's gonna be fine. We go into his little compound there, and there's this weird like kind of like aha moment where the kids didn't come in with us. And
well, they had ran in, and we found out they actually put all of our stuff where we were going to be sleeping. And then all of a sudden they disappeared, and we didn't know where they were. And so it was just like, where'd the kids
pitch
go?
Black.
Yeah, and so we were asking Danielle, we're like, the kids know they can come in here, right? And like talk to us. And he said that, oh no, they've never seen a vehicle before. Like they're not going to be inside for a while. And so we went out there and
literally like touching the vehicle, like, like, it's just like, oh my goodness, there's no way that they've never seen a vehicle. And so there's just like, we are in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of this great continent of Africa, and we're like, oh, what have we got ourselves
I was 19
into?
years old.
Yeah, I was 21, and so, so anyways, the next day, Daniel's been talking to them, telling them what we want to do, build a school, and so they come to this big piece of land, and they say, we want to give this to you. And there's this like, I'm like, wow, that's a lot of land for a school. And Danielle's like, well, he has this look like he hasn't told me everything, and he's like, they want to give you this for your house. I said, my what? And he says, yeah, they think you're moving here. And I was like, well, Danielle, you're my interpreter. So if they think I'm moving here, there's been a miscommunication, and you're the issue. So what's the deal here? And so I knew enough to know I could offend them by going, no way. So I was like, well, give me a couple, a day or so. We'll talk to him tomorrow, and when basically let him know I'm not moving here in a kind way. And so we walked away from that. And I was just like, man, God, I have no idea what you're doing. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Do you want me here? Do you not want me here? I just don't want to do something and find myself on my own. And then, and so my heart was really troubled. And we were walking down, like 10, 15 minutes later, walking down this goat trail. It's like all this farming. And so there's this little trail. And we're with the contractor we had brought out there to tell us about zoning and all kinds of stuff, if there was any. I'm like, I don't know, I'm in Africa, just help me out here. So this kid comes around the corner and sees us and loses it. Never seen white people before. Runs off screaming like saw the boogeyman. And so we kind of laughed because we're like, this is like the third time this has happened in like a couple hours. And so I said to him, I was like, well, what do they think when they see us? They think we have like lotion on. Like I have no concept of like never seeing someone, with a certain skin color and then seeing someone. So he's like, Tom, they have no clue. They're in the darkness. And there was that moment where we both looked at each other, and I had probably thought about what that lady said in a while, and it came pretty quick to her. Yeah. The fact that we knew this was what God was having us do, is that He's called us to speak the gospel in the darkness. And so
it was crazy. It was one of those moments where you all just get like the chills up your whole body, and you just look at each other and you're just like,
yeah, I had peace, because my heart was troubled about how do I tell these people, no, I'm not going to move here. And yet in that moment I was like, wow, so Burkina wasn't just a trip that we were up to. This is something that God is up to the whole time. And so we ended up coming back to the U.S. and just going, okay, that was different than how it was going to be, and there's more to this than we thought. And so all of our friends were like, how was your trip? And it was like, Well, I think God's calling us to do more than we thought He was calling us to do. And so they were all in. We had a handful of friends that were like, well, let's do it. And so we ended up a roundabout way starting a nonprofit, but not really on purpose.
I always say we did it on accident. Like I said, I was 19, so I had no idea of really what we were doing. And so I went down to the Bank of America. I went down there and I was like, I'd like to open a business account for our nonprofit we're starting. And he looks at me and he's like, well, do you have a UBI number? Do you have, and I was like, what's that? She's like, well, you need a UBI number or an EIN number or something to be able to open a bank account. And so I was like, okay. So what did we do? We went home and I Googled it. How to get a UBI number. And so sure enough, we created a nonprofit with Washington State. I got a UBI number. I applied for our EIN. And within a couple of days, I went back to the bank and I was like, here you go. And we opened our bank account and we came up with our name of Walk in the Light and just started moving forward one step at a time. It was really just, that's how I always tell people, it's on accident. We had planned to just build one school.
Which we did through, what any 19-year-old does when you're like, okay, I got to raise, it became like, okay, it's going to be 20,000. I was like, okay, it's going to be 30,000. Okay, this is gonna be more than that. And so also, we were doing car washes. That's the only way we knew, like, well, I know we can make $500 today. So, like, it's sunny, let's go make $500. And so,
every Saturday for 2 summers.
Gosh, I'll never do another car wash. And so,
neither will anyone.
Any of our friends, they just avoided us. They were like, it's sunny, I know why they're calling. And but we took a year and a half to 2 years through car washes and just just hard work, and we built the first half, the first three classrooms that we needed to start the school. And so really almost over there, they were like, they're not going to do, because in this, there's a sense that maybe in America, there's just all this money. So if you're going to do it, you would have done it like the first month that you said you were going to do it, not 24 months later. And so it was literally like we sent a ton of cement and at a time, here's some money, buy a ton of cement, build some blocks. And so it was just like the school, you could just like forever we had a foundation, that was it. And so, but then all of a sudden people started giving us opportunities, churches, they just see like these guys aren't joking, they're not going to give up. Like this isn't just something that they committed a summer to. Like this is 2 years and they really believe they're going to do this. And so we had 2 pastors in the same meeting say, you can come to our church. And so we're like, okay. And I my greatest fear was actually public speaking. And so it was probably, I'm so glad that there's no tapes of it. But I just basically laid it out what we were doing. What we
the one pastor afterwards was like, wow, that was really raw.
That's what he said. And I was like, okay, is that a good thing or not? But the churches loved us, and they were just like, I think a lot of them had seen a lot of professional missionaries come and give these beautiful, presentations, and it was just like, those are 2 people that think they're going to change the world and just don't know enough to know that they can't. And so it's just like, it was almost like, everyone became parents to us instantly, like, rooting for you to succeed. And so it's like the Rocky story almost of like, you can hear the music of like, these guys are going to do this. They're running. They really think they have a chance to win, And so all of a sudden we got like kids sponsored for this school, and it was like, it went from...
Well, there was a moment there where we had planned to give the school to the government.
Yeah.
And so we had kind of accomplished... We set out on a goal to build the school, and we were then going to hand over the government.
Yeah, because they don't have the money to build schools, but they could staff them if there was a school with government teachers.
So we had a moment where we kind of had fulfilled our mission, but yet as we were getting ready to hand over the school and we had learned over the 2 years about what education looked like, we couldn't do it. We couldn't hand it over when we knew that teachers didn't show up for months.
Well, not only that, we had this stronger sense that this was bigger. It was like every month we begin to realize God was up to more and more, and this wasn't even about a school. At some point we kind of realized this was more about what God... We started learning about the significance of Burkina Faso and its placement and its position for West Africa and this huge migration that's happening every year in Burkina, 5 million men leaving the country, And we just began to paint. God began to paint a picture for us of what He really wanted us to do. And so we were both on actually scooters
In Burkina Faso.
in Burkina Faso one trip.
Yeah, we both got to where we were going. We both just kind of sat down and were like, I feel like God's called us here. And that was kind of, the shift of going, we were building a school. Now we're keeping that school, which now means we need to figure out how to pay for the school. And then we got to figure out what's next. And
Yeah,
the rest
I was
is
reading
history.
a book that's the author was saying, when it comes to making an impact, do more for less. You'll have more influence, more impact. And so there was this wrestle of, do we stay here? Do we work in other countries? And that was just like this moment where we're on the scooter. You felt the Lord say something very similar like that to you. And then like, I already was reading this book, so it was almost like it was this strong sense that that's what he was saying.
And, okay, so we really just felt like God had called us to do more for less in Burkina Faso and to stay and transform Burkina Faso. We kind of had this idea that we might go and build a school in, Kenya or Romania, or, we didn't know what God was doing. And we really felt like, no, like we feel called to transform one country. And it was then that we kind of just came up with a strategic plan of what it looks like to partner with one community in each province. There's 45 provinces in Burkina Faso. And if we strategically partner with them and do community development and change what it looks like to develop that community in education, healthcare, agricultural, microfinance, all of those things, that it's going to influence that entire province. And if we can influence all 45 provinces, we truly believe that we can transform Burkina Faso. And you'd mentioned that the migration rate is so large in Burkina Faso. It has about 5 million people that migrate every year all throughout Mali and Niger and Ivory Coast and Ghana. And we're like, what would it look like for there to be thousands of educated, healthy, young, spirit-filled Christian young men and women to go and take the gospel to where we can't, and to take that around West Africa and transform West Africa. That's why our vision is to love West Africa, empower people, and following Jesus, because we really believe that's what's going to transform West Africa. And that's kind of our story of how we got here and
that's the journey we're on, and we're excited because people are starting to catch that vision, and it's no longer just the vision of Tom and Katie. It's now become the vision of so many people who have joined Walk in the Light. So they're owning the vision. They see it as their organization, their mission, their passion for Burkina and for West Africa. So it's pretty cool when something that God speaks to you, He's now speaking to people all over the place. So pretty awesome.
Thank you so much for being a part of Walk in the Light.